Episode 13, Loyalty, Leadership, and Life Transitions, a marketing exec's 15-year story. Welcome back to HR Decoded, the podcast where we uncomplicate the people problems breaking your business. I'm your host, Annika Hall, fractional COO and People Ops Strategist. And today we're talking about a kind of career story we don't get to hear enough of. One that's not about job hopping, chasing titles, or bouncing from startup to startup. My guest today has been with the same organization for over 15 years, building and leading their marketing, branding, and event strategy from one of the largest academic healthcare organizations based in California. Samantha Orcasitas is not just a marketing leader. She's a case study for brand evolution, career loyalty, and balancing executive leadership with life transitions, including becoming a new mom in the middle of it all. We're going to talk about how to build a brand that lasts, how companies can keep top talent for the long haul, and how leaders can better support employees during life changes. All right, so welcome, Samantha. Thank you so much. I'm very excited. Just for transparency, Samantha is a very dear friend of mine. And you know, I say you are who you have around you, and I am a boss, and so is Sammy. So I'm super excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, so I want to start at the beginning because you joined your company in 2009, and that is a lifetime ago. I feel like you are a unicorn in the world of employees. You are who people aspire to have join their team. And I'm very curious, what made you, one, join your company? Two, what kept you there all this time?
I think for the first one, it's definitely the reputation of my company. I work with an academic healthcare, and it has a really great reputation in my community. So I've always known about my company. I was definitely a patient there when I was younger. My mom actually used to work there when I was in high school. So I've always had a connection throughout life. So I've always been really interested. I work in healthcare, and I've always been interested in that field. So that was the reason I applied and heard about the culture. The reason I stayed for so long, because it is decades, I cannot believe I've been here for so long, is the people. Definitely it's a really great atmosphere. I love my department and the people I work with every day. It is a Christian organization, so there is that element of spirituality that I really like. And just kind of having, a job where you enjoy what you're marketing, as a marketing professional. It's, sometimes you're marketing things that, for lack of a better term, don't necessarily have a soul. I feel like my company is something that I can really stand behind. So that's kind of why I stayed for so long, because it's a very good culture.
Yeah, I love that you highlighted at the beginning of that, the people you work with. I was just having a conversation with an executive at a company I'm looking at doing some work for. And he asked me my thought process about hiring new people. And because he has this issue with trust of it's a startup. So they're like, oh my God, who am I going to bring in? This is their baby. They want to have the right team, the right combination of people. And I told him that's a very important thing, because it only takes one person to mess up the vibe, right? To mess up everything for everyone. And when you have a good group of people, it's in your best interest as owners, or I would say as leaders and owners of companies, to kind of keep that and protect that and be mindful of it. Because for somebody to stick around as long as you have to like the people. You cannot work with a bunch of messy jerks.
Everybody I work with.
Exactly. No, nobody's staying at a company this long and dealing with that. So I love that you highlighted that. And also with being at the company, you've held this leadership roles throughout the change, the change in time, and all throughout the industry changes and changes in policies. There's politics. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, and you've held this leadership role. How has that role kind of evolved throughout your tenure within that organization? And then also, what are some of the kind of challenges you've faced, and what's kept you engaged?
Yeah, I think with marketing, it's a field that changes quite a bit. I feel like there's always a new trend or a new hot topic that you're kind of, right now it's AI. Everyone is talking about AI and how that works. So I think one of the most important things of why I stayed with my career so long is because of that. I like the change of pace. Like every day doesn't look the same. And I feel like that's really important, that you evolve in your career, where things that you found challenging at one point in a way are easy now, because you kind of know the base. You have a great foundation in your field. So I think definitely marketing is something that is ever changing. You're always going to have to be in the know of what's coming out and how you can use it to market your company. So that's definitely one. How I evolved, I think we talked about this even before we got on, is simplifying things. I think when you start off, you kind of want to go extra and do a lot. And then you realize, okay, what is going to make this event or this campaign or this email, like what is important to have, and where am I going to put my energy and effort to make it the best for my company. So I think you learned a little bit better time management, which I think is really critical for leaders, is to kind of prioritize, okay, what needs to get done, maybe daily, hourly, or weekly, and then monthly, and then what's your goals for that year? I think you kind of have to have more of a plan. And I think when you're a new employee, you're kind of just absorbing and trying to learn. So it's definitely that trajectory. I'm excited to see where I am now as a leader and as an employee.
I love that. And you actually highlighted something else that I was going to ask you later about, but the changes in marketing. I'm curious about, was there any investment from your company in kind of you and your professional development? And the reason why I'm asking that is you would have started at this company before Facebook was popular. And so I'm just thinking, I hate to age us like that, but like at some point, the social media was not what it was. I think we had MySpace back when we were in school. I know, right? And so,
old.
right. And so now we're looking at Instagram, Twitter, X, Threads, like LinkedIn, and like all of these things. And so marketing has definitely shifted, and there's different types of marketing, right? Like obviously there's B2B, B2C, and looking at for investors, things like that. But knowing all of those shifts over the last, 15 plus years, was there like any sort of professional development investment, or was it a lot of self-driven, investment in yourself to kind of stay on track with all of the changes that are happening in ways of marketing?
It was a combination of both. Definitely have gone to a lot of professional conferences. In my field, Shishmid is a big one. It's a healthcare marketing conference that brings leaders from all around the country to talk about healthcare and education and how you market for those specific fields. But I've been to other conferences like the Bridge Conference, which is more of like about fundraising and branding. So I think those conferences are really, really essential to growth, because you get to speak to people in other parts of the country or sometimes world that are experiencing similar challenges or maybe have overcome them. But I feel like that investment that my company has made in like webinars and allowing us to do kind of development through that helped a lot. Also when I started working here, I was doing my master's. So they, there's a tuition reimbursement, and they helped, pay for some of my master's. And so that was really great to have that support. And they supported like my school schedule if I needed to leave early, or, just kind of have that balance. I think they very value education and development. I think that's really key. And they do bring, we do have like a staff development department that does bring like, I think we have a couple books, leadership books, and different speakers who have come throughout the years that you're able to participate in. So I definitely, take that as valuable as well. But yeah, yourself too. Like you cannot depend on that. You have to like read, listen to podcasts, speak to other experts. You have to, read blogs and kind of do all the things because our field is very ever changing and it's always something new and hot. And so you have to, is that going to work for my company? Can I apply that? Kind of balance that. But yeah, not to age us, but when I started, we did not have a social media department and now we do. So there is like job titles that exist now that didn't exist when I started in the field. Like there was no social media specialist when I started, and now there's a social media manager, a social media specialist, so it has changed quite a bit in the years that I've been here.
Yeah. And before we dive deep fully into brand and kind of marketing evolution, I do want to ask one more question of you just about kind of your time at the company, because I have a lot of like founders and executives that listen to this particular podcast and they're really worried about retention and keeping someone within the organization. Because once you lose someone, there's a lot of institutional knowledge and history that leaves with them and you can never gain that back. And so for someone like yourself, if you were talking to them and advising them, what would you say are some things that they can implement as far as, being able to create reasons for employees to stay with them for the long haul?
I think it's definitely trying to invest in the culture part of your company. You want to really have an identity and really value your employees. I think one of the things that my company does is this topic of servant leadership, where they talk about how, even the CEO or the president can, I've had them there help me carry boxes or help me with, trying to think of like a groundbreaking event where they've had to like look at dirt with me to see if it was soft enough to like move a shovel through. But I think that kind of collaboration and kind of knowing that you can text them or email them or communicate directly with them if it needs to be a decision even higher than you. I think that goes a long way to know that you have other leaders that have your back. So that's one, is having leaders that you respect and are there for you. I would say it's not competitive. It's definitely, you're my colleague. We're all working for the same goal. That's a big one. The other thing is feeling like you're valued, like people telling you you're doing a good job, or when you stay late or wake up early, or you're doing you're feeling like you're getting recognized, even if something small, like in a meeting, they say, hey, Sam, you did a really great job at that event, or, those photos that you took were great. Little things like that, like having recognition is really important. And I think leaders need to kind of set aside time to do that. I also really liked when I started working here that I never felt like a leader was taking credit for my work. Even though you're like under someone, it's not like they always gave the credit to the employee who did. And I think that's what I do as a leader too, because I really value that. Like if someone's like, hey, you did a really great job at this, I'll turn it around. Actually, that wasn't me. That was so-and-so, manage that whole project. I think it's really important to be really generous with giving credit or giving, definitely acclaim when someone is doing a good job. So, we have right now, the other thing that's changed in the field is, usually you have Slack or Teams, we have a channel that's called the wins channel. And we just really have just a bunch of wins in there. And it could be something really little, like, thank you for bringing donuts, or something so small, but we're always celebrating each other. And it's not just leaders, it can be, employees at any level. And so I think that wins channel is a great thing that we do. So something like that, as simple as that, I think is really valuable for employees.
I like that because it really highlights a perspective that I've kind of been highlighting a lot online about culture. And culture is not just about what you say, it's what you do. And those little things like, being able to, or having a leader who's willing to help you move boxes, or, give you that recognition and feeling valued, is important because it's what's happening when no one's looking, right? It's not, it's that's really the culture of the organization. And I think it's great that to hear that the leaders that you've worked with are really, invested in servant leadership, because you don't hear that a lot in today, especially on my side. I work with a lot of tech companies, and I think that there is this kind of belief that like, oh, I'm going to hire somebody and it's their job. Like, I don't need to worry about culture. That's HR's job. And that's so-and-so's job. And it's like this hands-off approach. Like, they're the ideas people, but they aren't necessarily the ones in the trenches. And I like the shift of understanding that servant leadership can get you a lot further. Your organization's been around for years, not just a year. It's not a startup, right? In that regard. And there's a reason why they've had people who've been attached and loyal to their organization for as long as they have. And it's a lot of it, I would say, from my opinion, would have to do with servant leadership, because that is a very, there's not a lot of leaders who invest in that type of leadership. Some of it is very transactional and it doesn't work out for them in the end.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all here for a job, but like, we do spend the majority of our day at work, and we want to make sure that it's a culture that we enjoy. I think people do better work. They're more invested when they feel like they like the company and like the leaders that they work with. So I think that's really essential.
And that's awesome. Okay, so now let's shift over into the brand and marketing evolution of things, because we talked a little bit about how it has shifted a lot over the years. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what is one of the kind of biggest changes you've seen, and how even you or just companies in general have approached brand strategy?
Yeah, I think branding, it's one of those things, like branding is a classic in the field of marketing. Not as much has changed in the branding realm. And I think we want to keep that way. I think your brand should be held close to your heart. It should be your stable foundation of who you are. What I've seen change around is kind of the tools or mechanisms in which you communicate that brand. Those are different. But at the end of the day, I always say Starbucks is Starbucks, McDonald's is McDonald's. Like, that brand, even if you're seeing it on Facebook or you're seeing it on Threads, you definitely still feel the same way towards those brands. And I think with branding, just because there's new trends doesn't mean you change your brand. The brand stays the same. It's the foundation of who you are. So that's a big part of my job, is I kind of say, like, I'm the protector of the brand. And that is where I think of my company as like my best friend. And I'm like, my best friend would never say that. So I'm not going to say that on social media.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to, that's not a picture that represents us. So I think it's really critical that you hold your brand really close to who you are and what you're doing. And every employee understands that brand.
Yeah. And when I'm talking to organizations, because I operate obviously from like the business operations side. And so a lot of what I do is optimize different departments, whether it's, legal, finance, it could be marketing, it could be product, whatever it is. And what I've noticed, especially within the startup kind of community, is this almost inability to articulate clearly what their brand is. It's like they found potentially, a product fit in the market, but they are not clear on the reason why they even exist. And I think that's kind of like foundational to a brand. It's kind of like, what is separating you from a competitor? What is the long-term like goal for your organization in the marketplace, and how do you want to be represented? And I think it's so interesting because it is tried and true, as you said, it's foundational to marketing. And I'm curious from your perspective, do you think that companies should jump in right away and start like marketing and kind of throwing things and seeing what fits? Or do you think that they should pause at the beginning and like figure out, what it is they're trying to say from a brand perspective before they go, full into marketing? Because it's very hard for HR or recruiting people, right, to recruit for like a head of marketing when it's unclear what the brand is and whether or not they can find the right person to fit that role, because it's unclear what the goal is for the organization. It's sometimes.
I would say the latter. Yeah, they should definitely pause first.
Okay.
And, we talk about the product, right? There's always a product. Maybe there's multiple products that your company is working towards. And I loved what you said right now, like what makes you different than a competitor. I think companies should sit down and write those down. A branding exercise goes a long way, getting, different leaders and employees into a room and asking those questions like, what do you see in our product? What do you feel when you walk in the door? What does your brand smell like? What does it look like? Use the senses to kind of really get a feel of who you are and write that mission statement down. Make sure those employees understand their mission statement. Because it goes a long way. I don't know, for my other marketers out there, they'll speak to this, but you'll have a lot of times a client or a department or an area come to you and be like, I want to market. I need a logo. I need this. I need that. And you sit down and you're like, okay, what are you marketing? Like, what's your product? And many times they don't have the answer to that. They have to go back and really figure out exactly what it is that we're even selling or, marketing or putting in front of people. So I think it is really important to pause. I think it'll make your marketing strategy go a long way. It'll have longevity. And you'll be really clear on decisions you need to make along the way, because you'll always have that mission statement and that brand to go back to.
That's great advice. And another thing that gets highlighted a lot, especially with these early stage companies, is they have limited budgets. Like, it sounds cute to throw everything in the kitchen sink, but like it can be costly to do that sometimes, especially because you do have a limited budget when it comes to things like marketing. Typically, I would say in tech, they invest heavily into like the engineering department, product, and they don't have these huge budgets for marketing. And so knowing that, is there any mistakes that you can say that companies really need to pay attention to that they could be making, knowing they don't have a lot of runway to undo it or redo it?
Yeah, mistakes are my favorite. Like going through, crisis marketing or crisis planning or PR, you really have to look at other companies and mistakes. There's definitely a framework for things that you need to consider. I think one of them is having diversity in your company and being able to lean on that. I live in an area where there's a lot of Spanish speaking, Hispanic culture. So kind of understand how they relate to healthcare is different than maybe other cultural groups. Like they don't want to go to the doctor. We know this. And so there's different things that we have to consider and know from a cultural perspective. So I think there's a lot of mistakes. Having a pulse on what is going on in the world and in the news and how you want to communicate about different topics. I've seen companies like, I think it was Sweet Greens as a great example of a company that their CEO got on LinkedIn and wrote some comments about how they thought COVID was affecting people because they were not eating healthy. And it makes sense why if it's in their brand, because Sweet Greens is about salads, it's healthy food. But to say that COVID was really happening to people who were not eating healthy was not very sensitive to the culture. And that created, some crisis for them. And it's, they were able to do some crisis management and fix it. And Sweet Greens is a great company. But it is really critical, that doesn't cost money. That was something free. They posted a comment on LinkedIn and they got a lot of maybe not positive press on it. And so I do think it is important to have diversity, have good leaders that are different from, you, and kind of get a feel of the pulse of society and culture. That's a big one. The other two is writing is really critical. I think having good writers and being able to write well makes your company look intelligent, looks like they know what they're talking about. Our president sends out like a notes of the president where he talks about, things that are happening in globally and things that he's thinking about, and kind of having that perspective is really important. You want a leader that can communicate well. So if that's a team that communicates well for your company, or that's you because you're a great communicator, I do think writing, speaking. You have to have people that can do these things because you want your brand to be expressed. So those are main things that I would say. And then I always go back to like protecting that brand. I don't know how many times I've seen Instagram profiles or LinkedIn profiles or websites that are all over the place. People lose trust when something is not organized well, it's not written well, it doesn't look good. So that's why it's important to not just send things out, but to make sure that you kind of have a feel of what your goals are. So
I love that because you touched on something that I'm highlighting in article that is going out, I think, next week, and it was about AI and this belief, and I have this skeptical position on it, but this belief that AI can replace certain roles, and one of those happens to be marketing, right? The marketing, HR, some of the more like foundational elements of an organization that are like not technical, and I was trying to articulate to a few folks in outside of conversations, which kind of caused me to write the article to begin with. It's about that human element. AI cannot convey everything, right? Like there's a piece where it's like, someone still has to read that. There's a human touch that has to be applied. It does not necessarily have kind of the insight into the demographics in your area and know how to write to that specific group, or it can't get up and make a speech. Yes, we have AI, voice bots and things, but it's not the same. And I think what you're just highlighting about kind of that human touch is important. And again, a lot of these startups and founders, they adopt AI tools without connecting to that human touch and realizing there's going to require human intervention there, because you can end up being tone deaf, right? Like something like the Sweet Greens example is something that quickly could have been written by AI, and AI is like, yep, fits the brand, do it. And then you're like, but you know what? That didn't land well because it's missing that human piece. I once had a leader that I worked with who said they wanted to create a holiday policy, right? Like time off. And you're like, okay, great. Like let's highlight holiday policies. But he's like, yeah, I only want to celebrate the real holidays, like the real ones. And I was like, what's not a real holiday? One, yeah. Like what's not a real holiday? And it's people's perspectives could end up making them extremely tone deaf. Right? It's like, no, the holidays that you celebrate are real to you, but the holidays that other people celebrate are real to them. So do not go online and say, we celebrate real holidays. And then you end up with a firestorm, a media firestorm of like, you don't believe in blah, 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 right?
It's a balance. It's a balance. Right. You want to have the personal touch, but like you also have to be careful because you're representing a company. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So that just made me think of that. And I'm like, still sometimes struggle to believe we had that conversation, but it is these real conversations that happen. And another thing that I want to touch on, just going back a little bit to, how you've stayed connected to the organization. Do you have any advice for organizations, newer organizations that are starting out with how they could bridge the connection between like their internal culture and then the external brand, and how to really, turn employees themselves into brand ambassadors? Because I think it's also who works there is kind of a reflection of an organization. Do you have any advice around that?
I think your internal culture should be a reflection of who you are externally. It should be really aligned. I think authenticity is really critical. Your employees are your brand ambassadors. And if you're not having happy employees, it's going to shine in ways that you cannot control. So that's why I think it's really, really important that employee engagement is part of that. We just launched an entire employee engagement campaign where we gave everyone shirts with our new tagline, and they're wearing them all around campus and they love the shirts. And, you see them out in the community, and it's so exciting to see them wearing it. But let's be real, if they didn't think the tagline was accurate to their work culture, they would not be wearing that shirt. So we have to make sure that whatever we present to our employees is authentic to who we are. So if we're saying that we promote work-life balance in the community, but our employees never get a day off, then it doesn't align with who our brand is. And so I think it is really critical that we look at what we're presenting externally, and that mirrors what our employees are experiencing. Because they are who people ask about, like, hey, what's it like to work there? What's it like, to treat a customer there? Or how is it? So you want to make sure that your culture represents who you are authentically.
I love that. Authenticity is key for sure. I love that. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. You recently became a mom. I'm very excited. I love this. Okay. How has that changed your perspective on leadership and your role at work?
It's changed a lot. I think that I was just talking to my boss about it, actually. I have been the person that goes to like every event, every networking thing, every meeting. And so I've really taken a step back and looked at, okay, what does work-life balance look like? And how can I still give the great, service and, be excited and happy about my output, but also delegate more, and allow for something maybe not to be handled directly by me. So that has been a shift for me. Like I don't go to every event now. I definitely, do some meetings ahead of time or after, but yeah, really giving some time to have the balance with my daughter. She's like definitely the priority for me. I think I mentioned too, like I used to teach part-time. I stepped back from teaching, so that I could just have, my full-time job and then my other really full-time job of being a mom. So I think that is something that definitely shifted after I had my child.
And I love that. I love that we're digging into this because a lot of startups tend to hire younger people, right? Like they tend to hire, people who are starting out in their career and they're like, we want them to grow. We want them to believe in our mission and we're going to grow together. And I love that. I love that. I've been working with startups for years, and time again, especially on the people operations side, the HR side of things, is this disconnect with founders mostly, but executives who've been in that organization for a long time is not acknowledging the change in season for their employees. And you want loyalty, you want people to stay around, but when I work with organizations, want them to also create systems and processes and a culture that celebrates those changes in life. Off camera and off audio, I was talking about how, having conversations about benefits because it's almost benefit season again, with some of my clients. And I was explaining to them that they needed to evolve their benefits packages. Like, yes, it was great when you had all 20-year-olds and they never went to the doctor. So your, premium stayed so low. And now you're noticing that people are getting married. They're adding their families to their plans. They're adding their kids to their plans. People are having higher utilizations on their plans. They're asking for HSAs, FSAs, there's so many things that have shifted. And companies, when they grow, they look at like, oh, the product, they look at those bottom line, but they detach themselves from kind of the human aspect where it's like every year that the company lasts, and those people have been there, they're growing, their lives are changing. And so do you feel like with your role, you used to show up to, like you said, everything, you attended everything, you went to every meeting. I've also noticed in your career, you've switched to kind of a hybrid role where you're in the office, you're out of the office. Do you feel like that has helped you with that transition, allowing for that flexibility?
It's the best. I definitely, when I started working in my department, there was a lot of moms and dads who were getting up at 5 a.m. and getting their child to daycare at 7 so that they can make their 8 a.m. meetings. I have the flexibility of waking up with my daughter and my office is like 3 steps away. Like it is the best to have that flexibility and to realize that my company has trust in me. I think one of the biggest thing is, my boss and a lot of the leaders have always told me, like, if you work at night, in the day, at lunch, however you work, it's a project base. Like, is your work getting done? Are your projects hitting the mark? And it's so funny because when I came back from maternity leave, my boss told me, you've never been more on fire than you have when you came back. Because, I was ready. Like, I had been out and I felt like, I go back to longevity. I've been there so long that for me to do a project, it's much faster than a new employee. I'm able to, I know the resources, what vendor to contact. So I think it is really important for companies to want to grow with their employee, because that employee is going to output more in the long run because they understand your company and, the tools. And so yeah, I think that having that flexibility of, hey, I need to take my daughter to a doctor's appointment or however is really, really critical. And it's the little things. Like, I know one of the benefits that my company has, which I thought was a really cool benefit, was that they pay for your breast pump. So, when you are breastfeeding and you have to go back to work, you need to pump. And so they give you an allowance for your breast pump, and you can have a mobile one where you could do, like, the technology today, it's like a quiet, silent one where I could be on a Zoom call and breast pumping. Like, it's crazy,
there you go.
But it exists, And so it's like, you couldn't do that back in the day. So for companies to balance those small things goes a long way. It goes a long way.
Yeah. And you said something that I really want the listeners to hear, which was that your company, your leadership trusts you. I think there's this huge debate right now in the market in general about allowing employees to stay remote or be remote, because whether or not they're working or they're sleeping or they're taking naps or doing these things, like, there's this huge debate about this. And a lot of it, I think, comes down to, from an employee perspective, is that trust aspect. It's like, do you trust me to do my job? Like, you're worried about a 15-minute nap versus the 15 extra hours that I add every week from working at home. Like, it sounds easy to work from home, but I work from home, and, that 9:00 email, that 10:00, sometimes it's hard to turn it off because I'm just a few steps from the computer. And so a lot of companies also get extra hours out of employees, and you tend to take that into consideration, but it really is about trust. And I think the fact that your organization trusts you also, I think, leads to that, like, as you said, your boss said, you being on fire, because like, they trust you to do your job, and you feel more confident when you go back to work to do that.
Yeah, I do think it's funny because the remote conversation is always like a fun one to have. And I've heard so many people tell me, I want to work remote. I want to work remote. I want to work remote. So it's definitely a hot topic about working remote or not. And yeah, there's definitely people out there who think you have to be in the office, but I've worked both, right? I worked for many years in the office, 8 to 5 every day. Mm-hmm. And I've also worked a remote. And I will tell you, I probably am twice as efficient remote, actually, because, I don't have the distractions of someone stopping by or calling for a random thing. My work is much more focused, and I do have the ability to have hybrid. So I go into the office when I need to, or, we have a home base. And I do think that has been the best balance. And I have to go in quite a bit sometimes for, like, either events or things like that. So I do have a hybrid mix, which I like.
I love that. Okay. And before we get to our final kind of rapid fire questions, can you share, are there any boundaries or lessons that you feel help you navigating kind of your new normal of being a leader, an executive, a mother, in working for your organization or in the marketing space? Are there any kind of boundaries or lessons that you feel help you?
Yes. I think one of the most important things that I do is I block calendar space for the things that are important to me. I think there's like on Wednesdays, I like to take my daughter for library time for an hour. So I make sure to block that time and do the hour library time. And then I always have like a time management. For me, it's really, really important to have like a flow of the day, like emails in the morning. Then I move into meetings. Then I move into the multiple messaging systems. And then I have at least a couple goals per day that I want to accomplish, either, work, mom, whatever life. I make sure that I have my goals for the day. And I think that is really, really important. But you mentioned boundaries. I think one of the other things that's critical as employees grow is being able to say no when a project doesn't make sense or isn't budget budget neutral or budget effective for the company, and that they have a leader or boss who is going to support them. I think that's really key. Many times I'll have to say, no, that doesn't really make sense, or can we simplify this? Or, graphic design is a big part of marketing. And sometimes people will want to over design things. They'll want a graphic designer to work on a flyer, on a piece of paper they're handing out. And sometimes like that really can be on letterhead. That's just a really easy templated thing. So really balancing what is a key marketing initiative and what isn't. So I think that's really important with boundaries, is you can't, and I think that's what I teach a lot of my new hires is, that project doesn't need X, Y, and Z. We can simplify it into X, or that can be done this way. So just really learning how to, stay budget neutral, stay budget-wise effective, and then also not overcomplicating simple projects.
Yeah. I love that. Do not overcomplicate it. I think everyone needs to learn that lesson. I love that. Okay, so let's do a quick lightning round before we close out. Can you tell me one book, podcast, resource, or recommendation that you have for anyone in marketing or leadership that you found helpful?
Yes, I would suggest you read Contagious by Jonah Berger. He writes a couple of books, but that book is probably my favorite of his. And it's just talking about how you can make products and ideas from word of mouth or social media. You talked about being cost effective. I think that book definitely changes the way you think about marketing.
Oh, I love that. Okay. And what is one thing you've learned about yourself in the last year?
You can survive with very little sleep.
I love that.
Yeah, you thought you needed 8 hours. You really don't.
Okay. All right. If you were in marketing, what would you be doing?
I would be a lawyer, actually.
I fully believe this, by the way. I know you personally. I 100% believe this about that. For sure, you would be good at it too.
Yeah, I like law. I do the part of marketing that I like to sometimes, even like since I was younger, when I started, is contracts. Like I like reading, and I think branding has a lot to do with it. It's regulations, norms, it's on paper. I like that. I don't know. I like the structure of it.
Awesome. Okay. And last question, what is your go-to way to decompress after a long day?
I like to read fiction. I'm in a book club. I think you know that. Definitely reading a fiction-based book, not something necessarily for work or for self-help or something fiction. It's fake. It's just fun. That's how I like to decompress.
Awesome. Well, Sammy, thank you so much for joining me today. Really, your career journey is very powerful. I think that a lot of people can learn lessons from you, one, as a person, but companies can learn a lot from your journey of how they should treat their employees and how to keep their employees within their organizations for long periods of time. And I think other marketing professionals could take a few notes from you about how to structure their careers and, listen to some of the advice you've given about being able to say no. Sometimes I think people think they have to say yes to everything all the time, and they get burned out very easily. So I appreciate all the advice that you've given and you joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. This was so much fun. Thanks for inviting me.
And for our listeners, think about your team. Are you creating an environment that makes people want to stay for 5, 10, 15 years? And when those people's lives change, are you making it possible for them to keep thriving? Those are some important questions I think everyone needs to answer, especially founders, leaders, entrepreneurs out there. When you're hiring people and you want to keep them for the long haul, think about what that means, okay? And if you want to learn more about how to help companies build operations and people strategies that grow with them, make sure you visit my website at www.hrdcoded.pro or connect with me on LinkedIn. And we will be back next week with another episode of HR Decoded. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.